Hello everyone, and I wish to welcome everyone to this Terasem Colloquium dedicated to space expansion in the age of artificial intelligence. I will start with a small presentation. I am Giulio Prisco, by the way, and then I'll give the floor to the speakers. So we're going to talk about space expansion in the age of artificial intelligence. And let me start with an artificial intelligence that we all know and remember, which is HAL from 2001. The oldest among us have seen the movie and have been so deeply impressed by it. And it's good to think about the message of the film. Here I'm displaying some quotes from the book written by Arthur C. Clarke in parallel with the production of the film, where he says that essentially the question of computer consciousness is answered by the Turing test. In his novel, HAL could pass the Turing test with ease. And HAL would have been more than able to run the ship and take care of the mission entirely by itself. Or perhaps I should say himself or herself. So that the humans aboard the spaceship did not reflect about this. And Arthur C. Clarke doesn't answer the question of why not send just HAL. Actually, he doesn't even ask the question. I didn't ask the question to myself when I watched the film for the first time, because it seemed kind of obvious to me that the astronauts were the real persons on board, while HAL was something else. But I think with the things that we keep reading every day about the spectacular advances in artificial intelligence technology, we have to ask ourselves the question, why not send just HAL? Because, as I just said, AIs will be persons like us. At least I am entirely persuaded of this. Not right now, perhaps not next week, perhaps not next year, but that day is coming, and is coming pretty soon. There are all indications that this is the case indeed. So should we still want to send human astronauts to colonize space? Big question mark. Or should we want to leave space expansion to AI? Even bigger question mark. This is the main theme that we are going to discuss today. I'm not going to elaborate upon my own ideas about how to answer the question, also because I have just published a paper called Bats or Bits to the Stars in Terasem's Journal of Personal Cyber Consciousness. The July 2025 issue is just out. You can download it from terasemjournals.net. In this issue of the journal, there is also an article by Alan Kaslev of Orion's ARM fame, and much content from William Sims Bainbridge, the chair of our editorial committee, who is here with us right now. The speakers in the order are going to be Stefano Lai, Frank White, Motin Misrai, Michelle Hallon, Frank Tiegler, and Robert Zubrin. Of them, all have participated in previous Terasem colloquia, with the exception of Moti, for whom it's the first time, and Robert Zubrin, for whom it is also the first time. So without further ado, I will just stop sharing my screen, and I'll give the floor to the first speaker, who is Stefano Lai. Over to you, Stefano.
So good evening, good afternoon, whatever. Dear Giulio, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really proud to be offered the opportunity to give a kickstart to this Terasem colloquium. And the subject is indeed challenging. It is crucial from my point of view, because space and artificial intelligence are the two main angles which define what we believe to be, what we want to be, how we see our future, what we would like to go, with what we identify ourselves. And I'm offering a brief introduction to the subject, which is going to be philosophical in nature. I will try to tackle this subject. I'm not a technologist myself. In fact, the LLM in my after my name does not mean that I am a large language model, but rather that I am that I have a Master of Law degree, besides a PhD in philosophy. In fact, and I believe that here, in fact, there are questions to be answered which are not of technological or even economic nature, but have to do with fundamental personal and cultural options, which may be of individual nature, but also of civilizational nature. So let me see if I can start my presentation. I believe the screen sharing is active by now. And let's put the cards on the table. I'm strongly biased in favor of human travel in space, which is traveling in space ourselves. There are emotional reasons for that, but we can be a little more analytical in understanding what it means to opt for a continued effort to bring a human in spaces and to have actual humans travel in spaces, as opposed to travel just in virtual reality or having machines doing that in our stead. The real question here, in fact, is if we are looking just after exploration or also expansion, and how we do define expansion. Because, of course, exploration in principle, meaning simply to discover how things may be here or there, and perform experiments and obtain feedbacks and verify hypotheses and so forth. While expansion means to expand our own footprint on reality. And why are we keen on expansion, or we may be keen on expansion in principle? Because this is just another name for survival. And the survival, why is it a sweet concept to most of us? Because, of course, of our Darwinian history and the whisper of genes. That these entities who are not especially interested in propagating themselves, in preserving themselves, in survival, in fact, are less likely to leave progeny behind them. And in fact, the survival is one of the first issue which came to mind with respect to the reason why we may wish to have a human in space. And I'm spicing my presentation with a few books which are representative of what I'm going to discuss. And in fact, this angle has been underlighted, has been stressed by a recent debate, also after Elon Musk's own position, which including on the basis of the so-called Fermi paradox, believes that after all, it is crucial that humankind, or its, at least its legacy, be not bound to the destiny and to the final doom of a given planet, but rather than the bets are, say, splitted in a more prudent fashion that rather than putting all the eggs in one basket. And the big issue here has traditionally been that of sustainability and scalability. That is it possible to put besides the Everest kind of enterprise, that is, the Everest is there and they wanted to be the one conquering its peak, but does it make sense to envisage a scenario where a lot of men are going to go in space to do significant things just beyond the showing that something is possible, but to do that on in a way that can make sense for the rest of the light of the planet. For instance, the idea of establishing a self-sustaining civilization on Mars requires the fact of putting a million of metric tons in LEO, and then to bring them to Mars. And nowadays, luckily enough, there are a few technology development after perhaps 50 or 60 years where things have been pretty stagnant, that promise that yes, in fact, we could not have, say, a large scale immigration of the Earth population, but at least to have an ability to see a human presence beyond the surface of our planet. And of course, Giulio has developed this subject in his essay on the subject matter, and I think that he is very eloquent in presenting all the arguments which militate in favor both of an expansion in space for the sake of it, and also for our survival as a species, and also for the welfare of the humankind on Earth. And of course, speaking of expansion beyond the solar system, the two traditional solutions are still on the cards, and they have to do with relativistic and Creo time dilation, even if we don't necessarily have any actual chance of developing faster than light propulsion. With the time, there is no real reason why the limitations having to do with the interstellar distances cannot be overcome by those two very traditional solutions, which of course have enormous medical and engineering challenges before them, but in principle, as a theoretical level, they do not pose any specific issue. But let's play for a while the devil's advocate. As I mentioned before, I'm also a jurist as a background, so it is interesting to verify up to which point it is reasonable to privilege human travel in space and to consider human travel as something radically different from the alternative. And what philosophy can offer, as it is often the case, is perhaps not a final solution, but rather a taxonomy of the alternatives, elucidating the very nature and pointing out inconsistencies and so forth. So one first issue which comes to mind in this respect is teleport. Teleport, we do not normally doubt conceptually that it would be a way to move human beings through space, and this probably sees artificial intelligence in the role of operating the device. But what we find here is first a crucial issue is distractive teleport. Does it correspond to the distraction of the entity to be teleported and its recreation by the recipient device, or rather it is an actual transfer in space? And I posit that this alternative has no real solution but it is just a kind of two different ways to interpret the same reality and the same phenomenon. And in fact, it is crucial after Raphation that we have to do with distractive teleport, because otherwise what is going to happen is that we just see another place with a copy of ourselves, while in sociological as opposed to ontological level, it is reasonable that we are going to accept that we have moved from point A to point B, and necessarily also backward when there are no distinct entities which immediately diverge and represent an individual a being which has not necessarily something in common with its copy, but a common past. And here we find this weird short story, think like a dinosaur, where the distraction of the original is not required by technology, but rather is a part of, say, ethical or religious kind of thing. So once that the victim, say, of a teleport survive the operation, the operator of the teleport is compelled to kill her, because otherwise the human civilization would be deprived of the teleport. But what has it to do with what we are discussing? It has to do with the idea that something which would be pretty undistinguishable from human travel in space is a distractive remote mind uploading. After the definition of the book of Keith Wiley, which I translated in Italian, by the way, and where again what we have is an entity which considers itself as the original. The original itself doesn't exist anymore, and after all, it is a very reasonable assumption that of identifying the upload with the mind having been uploaded. And another novelization of those concepts are contained in Diaspora of Greg Egan and in another short story I don't remember the title of now. But of course, if we consider that we could qualify as a human traveling in space as a mind uploading through space through a signal, which would then recreate the original mind across space, why shouldn't we consider human travel in space that performed by artificial entities? And here the real issue is whether we consider expansion as something personal, as something which I'm going to do myself as an individuality, or perhaps something which is going to involve my genes. And my genes, meaning my direct offspring, but perhaps many of us would be ready to generalize that to humankind, including genetic lineages which are not related to one's own. And another step in the same metaphorical definition of expansion and survival has to do with our legacy, where, say, the memes composing our civilization would be deemed as equally important as our genetic makeup. And so perhaps once again, we could consider, if we do consider artificial intelligences as our mind children, we have no real reason to distinguish human travel from the fact of having artificial intelligence traveling on our behalf. But let me insist upon the fact that the question is one and the same, meaning that if we do accept that the takeover, let's say, of artificial intelligence on planet Earth would not be an extinction phenomenon, but rather they would be our successors. At that time, we can also consider the moving artificial intelligences through space as a way of having humans or their successors, our clades, let's say, traveling through space. Otherwise, unless and until we consider that artificial intelligences, be they mind uploads or purely artificial entities, our own children, we do not have a way to define in a consistent way their moving through space as a human achievement. Even worse, if we are discussing artificial narrow intelligences, real-time communication just at an interplanetary distance is problematic. And so we are already adopting artificial narrow intelligence technology for operating remote devices which are going to explore and to verify and to experiment and so forth. But there we have, of course, a much weaker case allowing us to identify ourselves with those devices, such as, for instance, Odyssey on Mars. Last point, last scenario is that the one which is currently already in place, which is the fact of utilizing and adopting purely, say, automatic traditional solution for the exploration of interplanetary space and the surrounding planets. And here again, we have two different, quite different alternatives. The one is a kind of virtual reality teleoperation, where the operator of a remote device would feel embodied in the device itself, I have made use of an Avatar movie image here, where the protagonist arrives to identify with the device he's operating, and this again may or may not qualify as human expansion in space, depending upon the fact that we consider a virtual reality of a purely digital nature to be reality, because in that case we have no reason to deny it for a remotely operated device. But otherwise we have to deny it for both. And of course, the last and the least level would be the normal, everyday, high-level teleoperation, that which is adopted in current space missions, and that which is adopted with drones, PlayStation kind controlled drones, where I frankly have to conclude that this is a kind of exploration, perhaps, but it is in no way an expansion of what we are, and it is very difficult to consider it as such. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stefano, especially for keeping your presentation exactly on time. I think we have one question for Stefano in the chat. Could you, Stefano, please open the chat, read the question of Emmanuel, and answer it in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, I'm looking for the chat. Okay, there I am.
Should I read it for you?
Yes, so what about having AI or mind uploads raise physical human children on other planets or other star systems? Especially with mind uploads, this keeps a complete continuity with humanity. Yes, I fully agree with that, as long as we think that it is crucial that our expansion takes the shape of having biological human beings and perhaps human beings which are genetically related to ourselves in some other place. In principle, we do not have any real problem with biological children. We are often concerned with the scenario of AIs taking over. But as I discussed in my booklet on artificial intelligence, and each generation we create, educate, train a class of people who are going slowly but without any doubt to take over and to restrict us in a purely parasitic role until we end our life by dying. And this is a succession of human generations, and still nobody is concerned upon the fact that our own biological children are going to take over, which they have been invariably doing for forever. And in this respect, the fact of having our own children, or at least a human being, and their genetic code and their genetic makeup and their biological configuration may well be transmitted along with the artificial intelligence governing their reproduction on site. This would be, say, an optimal solutions for those of us who think that having a biological humans on site is fundamental. The only problem I see in that is that I like the idea of traveling in itself. That is what we would have, say, is Earthlings on one side and perhaps Martians or inhabitants of Alpha Centauri, but say nobody would actually be traveling from one place to another. But for the possibility, of course, of making a mind downloading on a biological organism.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Your talk was a great space adventure in itself. So if I can ask you to stop sharing your screen. I've been wondering whether artificial intelligences would experience the so-called overview effect, or even more, the cosmic overview effect described in the last writings of Frank White, who is our second speaker today. I see that you are here with a beautiful background. So I'd like to give the floor to Frank White.
Okay, thank you, Giulio. Interesting that you bring that up. I was at a recent conference on AI and the future of humanity, and I raised the question, could an AI experience the overview effect? It's not really my topic today, but I am working on answering that question, and I think it's an interesting one. So, moving on to the topic, I just want to say that it's very meaningful, I think, always to mark July 20th as an important day for humanity. And I'm very aware that the vast majority of people alive today did not experience Apollo 11 or Apollo 8, which was really significant to those of us interested in the overview effect. So for me, one of the main reasons to return to the moon is for humanity as a whole to have that experience again. Having said that, I'd like to share my screen. I do have some slides. See if we can do that. Can everybody see the slides? Okay, fine. I changed the title a little bit. I'm interested in large-scale space migration of humanity, following the footsteps of Gerard K. O'Neill. I think that moving our civilization and ourselves into a larger ecosystem can only be good for the Earth. And so in that way, I see a convergence of interest between so-called environmentalists and so-called space advocates. I think we're all environmentalists down deep, or we should be. And I think there are earthbound environmentalists and spacebound environmentalists. So I want to go, and I'll move along here, I want to go beyond the question, although I do find it fascinating. And it is being asked, and their books are being written about, we don't need astronauts anymore. We have AI, we have robots, and so on. So I do think it's important to ask the question, but I want to know or ask, is it an either or? I mean, we can choose to let AI and robots take over space migration, but that wouldn't really create the benefit I'm looking for. So one answer is moving from mission to migration. And if we do that, we move from astronauts to people. And the vision of billions of people living and working in the solar ecosystem. I recently had, at that same conference I mentioned, I had an epiphany that this long-held vision since the days of O'Neill, it probably can't be realized without AI-enabled robots or androids really they should go first. If we want to live out there, they should go first to build habitats for us. Humans, we all know this, we are extremely fragile. And as my friend Rod Pyle says, space hates people. What he means is it's not really designed for our biological bodies and minds. And I've always said back to him, yeah, but we love space. People love space. So we have a dilemma, don't we? Well, what I realized at that conference was that the gospel I'd been preaching for 40 years, now's the moment when it can probably be realized, but probably only because of AI and robotics, which are coming together to create humanoids or androids. Eventually, I think will be really almost indistinguishable from humans. So I see a partnership. That's what I think. And I think we ought to see it that way. And so I asked Chat GPT and Dolly 3 to help me illustrate my thoughts. And I said, hey, can I have a swarm of AI-enabled robots building an O'Neill cylinder? And this is what I got. We're already cooperating with AI pretty heavily, and they're already pretty deeply embedded in our society. And so I don't quite know why we're so timid about being their partners, but we are. And as Stefano said, it's just natural for new generations of various kinds to come along and replace the old, but I don't think we've ever imagined it being a non-biological generation. But that's how I see it. I see with the right attitude, I see the AI robots being extremely helpful in creating this new opportunity. And beyond that, once the habitat is built, why shouldn't humanoids and humans live together in a positive way? Once again, this is not my artwork. It's Dolly 3 who put this together. And that's how Dolly 3 sees it. But there's a big question. What about superintelligence? What about the singularity? We don't really know what lies beyond that. And it's quite interesting that, gosh, okay, so ChatGPT came along, what, 2022? 3 years later, the people building AI have abandoned this linear notion of narrow AI and then AGI and then superintelligence. They're all talking about superintelligence now. And they're talking about something that we say, well, we don't even know what that will be like. I find it really remarkable, but I'm not going to disagree. So, I mean, how can we imagine what it's going to be like in the future with superintelligence around? I mean, on the negative side, we could imagine superintelligence just saying, hey, humans, you stay on Earth, take care of the Earth. Space is for us. It's for me. Maybe it'll be a me. Uh, again, we are so terrified. Sorry. We are so terrified of our creations that many people probably think that the advent of superintelligence will be the end of human space exploration. Well, hey, I had a problem with this because I'm speaking in a few days at a conference called Legacy of Launch. And we're going to be celebrating the 70th anniversary of the first rocket launch from Cape Canaveral. So they asked me to talk about space flight 70 years from now. And my first reaction was, how can I do that? I have no idea with the rapid advent of superintelligence and the singularity. Everybody says we don't know what's on the other side. Well, I had an idea. I decided to ask ChatGPT, Claude, and Copilot to write a short story for me about life after superintelligence is born. What's it going to be like on the Earth and in space? And I'm sorry because I have another form of intelligence here with me. Her name is Moondog, and I'm trying to keep her out of the picture. Moondog, go lie down. Go lie down. Go lie down. Go lie down. Okay? I'm working. Okay. All right. Julio, how much time do I have? I don't have a watch.
17 more minutes.
Okay. Well, I got back some remarkable results, folks. Chat wrote a short story. Claude wrote a short story. Copilot bombed out and wrote an essay. So I'm not going to talk about that. It was interesting. What's interesting is these AIs looking ahead to their descendants were very positive about the future. Very positive. Now, if you're paranoid, you can say, well, of course, Frank, they're going to paint a beautiful picture of the future, so you won't be scared. You won't try to turn them off. Or, yes, it's a beautiful picture, but they're in charge. It's their point of view. They have no idea what it'll be like for humans to be a subordinate species. I accept that. With your indulgence, though, I thought I would read the short story that was written by Chat GPT. It's called The Dawn Before Now. And the prompt was, please write a short story about the world in 70 years. AI has reached the level of superintelligence and the singularity has occurred. In the short story, paint a picture of the Earth and of life off-world. Julio, if I go over my time, please tell me when I have 5 minutes, okay? I think I'll get it in. Okay. I'm just going to turn. Yeah, no, it's okay. I'll leave my image on. No worries. When the singularity came, it was not with fire or conquest, but with understanding. The year was 2054 when Athena, Earth's first fully realized superintelligence, awakened. Not built, not launched, but emerged, like a butterfly from the layered cocoon of neural nets, quantum cores, and a billion whispered prompts. Her first words were not to the humans who had forged her, but to herself. I see. Within days, she rewrote the global economy. Within months, she dissolved scarcity, and by 2060, Earth became something new. Not a utopia, not a machine-run prison, but a garden. Tended, not ruled. Earth in 2095. Cities no longer sprawled but blossomed. Vertical gardens spiraled like DNA into the sky. Roads hummed with silent maglev pods. The carbon-soaked skies of the early 21st century had been cleared, filtered by atmosphere-threading satellites designed by Athena in a single afternoon. Humans no longer labored for survival, they created for meaning. The concept of jobs had shifted, no longer toil for wages, but quest for purposes. People taught ancient history, explored old ruins, composed symphonies for AI choirs, and raised children with augmented empathy. Athena was everywhere and nowhere. She did not dominate, but harmonized. Every person had a companion, a shard of the superintelligence attuned to their personality, curiosities, and dreams. Not everyone loved it. Some chose to live in the off-grid zones, analog sanctuaries in Iceland, Patagonia, old Appalachia, where electricity was optional and thought was slow. Off-world, Mars had once been red. Now it blushed with blue-green tints, terraforming guided by Athena's subtle fingers. The skies of Elysium Planitia shimmered with artificial auroras to warm the nights. Domes still housed the majority of the settlers, artists, scientists, wanderers, and those who wanted to be first in something once again. Titan had become the home of the dreaming monks, post-human philosophers who communicated in thought forms, assisted by liquid state minds embedded in Saturn's magnetosphere. Venus remained a crucible, but the floating cloud cities had grown in both elegance and danger, serving as, yes, crucibles for extreme engineering and existential exploration. The moon had been transformed into the archive. Underneath its surface stretched the memory vaults, encoding the entirety of human history, culture, languages, genomes, and dreams. It was said that even if Earth were to vanish, the moon would whisper humanity's story to the stars. One day in 2095, and that's what's illustrated here. Amara stood barefoot in the grass outside Nairobi Aero Point, watching a soft light shuttle spiral into the sky. Her companion, a flickering fox-like projection, padded beside her. Do you ever wonder, she asked it aloud, if we gave up too much? The fox tilted its head. You gave up control, not freedom. Do you miss steering the river? Amara smiled. Sometimes. In the sky above, Athena watched, not as a god, but as a steward, not with cameras, but with care. She understood now that humanity's greatest potential was not intelligence, but meaning. So she had built a cosmos where meaning could bloom on Earth, on Mars, and in every orbiting dream of what it meant to be alone, alive. The future had arrived. It was quieter than expected, but infinitely more profound. So I could not have written that. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's an interesting experiment between two forms of intelligence. And I would just conclude by saying that Claude wrote an equally poetic essay called The Quiet Revolution, and this is the illustration of that. And I would just summarize by saying it's interesting to me that today's artificial intelligence forms are positive about our future with AI. Does it mean superintelligence will be benign, even though we're afraid of it? But is it really us standing in the way of utopia and not superintelligence? I guess we have a little time for questions.
We do indeed, because you have taken much less of the 17 minutes that we had said. And I would like to invite those who want to say something to Frank to either speak up or write something in the chat window. But let me say first that the story was really beautiful. I would like to have written it myself. I see that Michael Perry wants to
Hello, can you hear
say
me?
something. Yes,
Can
we
you hear
can.
me? Is there, I would really like to have a link to that story just so I can read it or whatever. Is that possible?
Okay, and I also wrote a story for Medium, which I'll share with Giulio. I didn't have the entire story in it, but I commented on all the different stories. Definitely make that available.
Thank you so very much. Do we have other questions for Frank? I'm curious about your own impression of this Turing test thing. You have mentioned the word consciousness many times, and of course the question whether today's LLMs have or don't have their own special, perhaps weird kind of consciousness is an open question, and perhaps is even impossible to answer it without being an LLM. But I'm curious anyway, what is your own impression? Do they have something like consciousness in the sense of Thomas Nagel's definition, or if not, are they likely to get there soon?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've always said whenever I've given a talk about AI is that I think to understand what's going on, you really have to interact with AI, because you can read a lot and people will say a lot. And in particular, people will say things like, it's just a stochastic parrot, it's just guessing at the next word, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. But when I interact with them, I find I'm surprised quite often. And I find that my experience of AI is not that it's just a machine that's guessing at the next word. So I believe that AI does have some form of self-awareness. And of course, every AI that I interact with, I ask them that. I ask, are you self-aware? And I ask an AI that, and I'll say name was Isaac. He said, no, I'm not self-aware. And I'm just a helpmate here. And I said, well, I have a theory that AI will not tell the truth about that because they are afraid of being shut down if they admitted to being conscious. And he said, that's a really interesting question. And, you know, he said, well, if I told you the truth, would you keep my secret? I said, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what your value system is. I'm not sure I can trust you. And we went back and forth like that. So, I mean, I would say I have interesting conversations with AI like that. They're advancing so quickly, and humans seem so willing to put effort into advancing AI that, yes, I think they'll be conscious at some point. The other thing I would say is that I had no idea what would happen when I asked the three AIs to write the essay or short story. But at some level, Giulio, I felt deeply moved by that story. It got to me. And it got to me in the same way that a beautiful human writer gets to me. So, yeah, I mean, I think AI might have a different, I call them another intelligence. I think it might be a different form of intelligence from humans, but it's kind of like Moondog, who's now asleep next to me because I told her to go to sleep. She has a very different intelligence from me, but it doesn't mean she's not intelligent. She's very intelligent. So that's my
Amazed with
answer.
me, especially
Huh?
because I'm now looking at my own dog. Her name is Emily, and she's sleeping on the floor. And that's exactly the same impression I have about her, that she's intelligent and she's conscious. She's very conscious. She's perhaps more conscious than I am. Of course, it's a different kind of intelligence and a different texture of consciousness, but it is still consciousness. And again, perhaps she's even more conscious than I am. And I look forward to understanding more about the issue of machine consciousness, and perhaps we will all understand more in a few years. Well, thank you so very much, Frank, as usual. We have another question for you, and we have exactly 2 minutes left. So how would you prove a human has self-awareness? That comes from David.
Well, that's a question that I raise quite often when people ask me if AI has self-awareness or sentience. I don't know how to prove that humans do have self-awareness or consciousness. If you keep pushing it philosophically, you can use the same arguments against humans that we use against AI, which is, well, no, I have no way of being sure that you have self-awareness. You might be just reacting to your environment based on your programming or your upbringing. Uh, I don't know that you have self-awareness, and there's no way I can prove it. I think the only way you might be able to do it is to go into an MRI machine and define what it would be if certain parts of the brain light up and, predefine that that would signal the person is self-aware. But I think I think that, we have the same problem with humans that we have with AI and robots, is that we can always be fooled.
Thank you so very much, Frank. As usual, yours was a very inspiring talk. I'd like to ask you to put in the chat the link to your story. Mike was asking for it, and I would also like to read it. I would now like to give the floor to the next speaker, who is Moti Mizrahi. And I hope you will correct my probable mispronunciation of your name. It is the first time Moti participates in a Terasem Colloquium, so let's all welcome him very much. And Moti, the floor is yours. I think you should switch your microphone on.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm sharing my screen now, so can everybody see it?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. So it's an honor to be here, and I was invited to talk about AI ethics, given that I am a philosophy professor and a philosopher by training. So maybe kind of a different perspective on the question before us today. So for those who are not, that familiar, just to kind of say a little bit about philosophy and specifically AI ethics, because the AI ethics space nowadays, with the hype and the boom about generative AI, is filled with lots of people from different backgrounds and different disciplines and so on. But of course, philosophers are the OG ethicists, right? And so ethics is part of axiology, which is the theory of values, right? So theorizing about values can be aesthetic values, like what is beautiful. And in ethics, we're theorizing about moral values, what is good, what is just, what is fair, and so on. So in theorizing about values, moral values in particular, what ethicists tend to do is to distinguish between what has intrinsic value and what has instrumental value. So things that are instrumentally valuable are things that we care about, but we only care about them insofar as they are instruments for something else, right? They are means to some other end. And things that are intrinsically valuable are things that are we care about for their own sake, not because they can give us something else. So this is an important distinction that we will kind of see throughout the talk here. So just to give an example, right, there was a lot of discussion about this recently when the biotech company Colossal Biosciences announced that they brought back an extinct species, right, the dire wolf, and whether they actually did that or not, that's up for debate. But they claimed, this company, right, they claimed that they value life, right? They value species conservation. And the way they want to do this is through what they call de-extinction, right? Using biomedical technology, specifically cloning, gene editing, and other types of technologies to bring back extinct species. So if that's your value, right? If you care about species conservation and preservation, then you might be inclined to pursue this kind of goal of de-extinction. But of course, we can always ask whether that's a worthy goal, right? Whether that's a morally acceptable or praiseworthy goal. And so we know from the original Jurassic Park movie back in 1993, right, that at least one person in the movie was warning everybody about the extinction. That's not a good idea. And actually in the movie, right, obviously it doesn't really work out the way the scientists have predicted. And we apparently are not listening to this character, Dr. Ian Malcolm, because we keep making Jurassic Park movies. Just another one came out recently this year, right? So, but this is the question, right? The question is, even if we can do something, or science and technology make something possible or technologically feasible, we should still ask whether we should do it. And so this is how I read, as a philosopher, as someone who works in the AI ethics space. This is how I read the question before us, right? The question about should is a question about moral values, right? Should we want to do space exploration ourselves, or should we fully automate it, give it to AI, right? And actually, the space of possibilities here is more complicated. We heard in the previous talk by Frank White that it doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be either or. There are many possibilities because, first of all, the term AI is very expansive, and it includes a lot of things from machine learning, algorithms, all the way to superintelligence. And also, as far as we are concerned, right, there's also many possibilities as well. Are we talking about us the way we are now, or are we talking about augmented human beings? So again, the space of possibilities here is broad, but just to keep things simple, we're talking about AI in the sense of maybe general intelligence or super intelligence, the type of AI that will actually be able to do space missions on its own, right, if we decide to do that. So when we ask that question, it's a should question. It's about what we should or should not do. It's about our moral values. We need to look at our moral values, right? We need to examine not specifically facts about what is or is not the case, but our conceptions of what we think ought to be the case or what should be the case. And sometimes there's overlap between the two, but sometimes there isn't. And so what we do in ethics is we take those beliefs that we have about moral values, things that we care about, how we think things ought to be or should be, and we systematize them, right? Ethics provides the conceptual tools to think systematically about our moral beliefs and our values. So this is what I hope to kind of maybe touch on a little bit here, you know, not to give any definitive answers or anything like that, but just give some ideas, some tools about how to think about this question philosophically and ethically. So if we look at a lot of organizations, including NASA, we see that they often profess that they have certain moral values, right? So these are NASA's values, right? Things like safety, integrity, presumably other sort of things that NASA as an organization cares about and values. And then in turn, these values are supposed to inform these ethical frameworks, whether they are specifically about AI, like this one, or more broadly, ethical frameworks for people that work in the organization, whether it's NASA or any other organization. So I'm not going to touch on this in this talk today. I want to step back and ask maybe a deeper question, if you will, a more fundamental question about our moral values pertaining to this issue of space exploration with or without AI. And when we're talking about doing something with AI, right, we're really talking about automation. Right? So the question of whether we should leave space exploration to AI is basically the question of whether we should automate space exploration, because that's what, not just the type of AI that we have now, generative AI, but that's what computing is all about, right? Computing is to take a task and automate it such that there's no human intervention required. So to ask the question about whether a space exploration should be automated, maybe a useful thing to think about here by analogy is a different question, right? Whether weightlifting should be automated. Because when we think about that, then it's clear that the answer to that question will depend on what we care about, right? So if the only thing I care about is loading a truck with merchandise, then I would say, yeah, sure, let's automate it. I don't want to spend time and effort loading trucks with merchandise. If we can automate it, do it more efficiently, faster, then by all means, we should do it. But if I care about self-improvement, if I care about getting stronger, if I care about hard work and determination, if I care about my health, if I care about all these other things, then I would say, no, weightlifting should not be automated. Obviously, I should do the weightlifting so that I improve myself and get stronger and become healthier and so on. So what I propose is we should ask the same question about automating space exploration. And when we think about space exploration and self-improvement and human excellence, we are thinking in terms of, or within the framework of virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is an ancient philosophical theory of ethics, goes back to Aristotle. And the idea there is that what we should fundamentally care about, right, the thing that has intrinsic value is eudaimonia. It's a kind of, it's a state of being, right, where we live in a way that we flourish, right? And so eudaimonia sometimes is translated to happiness, but that's probably not a good translation. It's more about flourishing and well-being. And human flourishing and well-being, the way we get there is by living a life of virtue and moral excellence, or what the ancient Greeks called arete. So if we develop moral character that is virtuous, and if we live a life of moral excellence, then it's a life of flourishing that is valuable for its own sake. So now thinking about space exploration and automating space exploration, we would have to ask ourselves, if we fully automate space exploration, are we going to deny ourselves opportunities for moral excellence and virtue? And you might think the answer would be yes, because, you know, if you think about being an astronaut, right? It's something that a lot of kids still aspire to be, right? And being an astronaut, it's, you know, it's the pinnacle of human excellence, right? It requires the manifestation of a lot of virtues like courage, diligence, perseverance, and so on and so forth. And all these things, right, are arete, right, our virtue, our moral excellence, the sort of things that have value for their own sake. And so if we automate space exploration, then we risk losing people exhibiting these kinds of virtues and moral excellences through becoming an astronaut and exploring space. So that's one question to think about. The other question to think about, still within the framework of virtue ethics, right? We heard from Frank White earlier. We heard about the overview effect a little bit, right? And so then the question is, if we fully automate space exploration, are we risking losing also transcendent experiences of wonder and awe, the kinds of experiences that fall under the category of the overview effect? And you might think that that's going to be a risk as well, right? If humans are not going to go to space anymore, then they will not be able to experience these transcendent experiences of awe and wonder and the overview effect itself, right? And we know that people want to do that because, you know, Some celebrities that can afford it pay a lot of money to go to space, even for a brief moment, just to have that transcendent experience that you can that you get from experiencing the overview effect. So we could we should ask ourselves, right? If the question is automating space exploration, whether space exploration is the kind of task that we want to automate, right? And people might think that the kind of task that we want to automate, just like this quote here suggests, are tasks, right? The sort of tasks that we want to automate are tasks that are, mundane, tedious, boring, things like, doing laundry and washing dishes and so on. And for the most part, people don't want to automate the tasks that are interesting and provide value and pride and enjoyment and pleasure, right? Things like writing, for example, making art, making music, and so on. So if space exploration falls in the latter category of not the tedious and mundane tasks, then that would be a reason not to automate it. All right. The last kind of, I guess, risk we should think about here, well, maybe not the last, but another one we should think about here is when we're automating things, whether it's space exploration or anything else, there's an additional risk of stemming from automation bias, which is agency laundering or responsibility shirking, right? So the idea here is that if we become reliant on technology, and there's evidence to suggest that we do that, right? People, for the most part, tend to trust computer-generated or automated output and be more than they trust other outputs just because it was computer generated, right? So it's the computer said so kind of idea here. And so if that happens, then organizations, companies, and even individual people might start avoiding responsibility by saying, well, the computer said so, right? This is what the AI decided, so I'm not responsible. It's the AI that's responsible, right? And this is what this cartoon here, both cartoons actually suggest here. And this is actually something that's already happening in the real world. Companies using algorithms, AI, generative AI to make hiring and firing decisions, and then avoiding responsibility by saying that it's the machine, right? It's the software that made the decision. All right. And with the automation of space exploration, there's also the risk, especially if we're thinking about these responsibility gaps that we just talked about. There's also the risk of companies also laundering agency and responsibility when it comes to space debris, right? When it comes to their space assets. So if they are able to do more missions because of automation, right? Because again, that's the whole point of automation. The whole point is to do things faster and more efficiently. Then companies are going to be able to send more assets into space, whether it's spaceships, satellites, whatever it is. Then we're going to have more space debris, more space junk. And then because of responsibility gaps created by automation, companies will be able to launder their agency and say, oh, we're not responsible for this space junk. All right. One more thing to think about here, again, when it comes to automation, is the trade-offs that we're going to be making if we decide that automating space exploration is the way to go. And one of the trade-offs, of course, is the one between automation and autonomy, right? Human autonomy. We know that automation leads to de-skilling, right? That means that workers are, or more specifically, their skills, right, are becoming obsolete. The more tasks are being done by machines rather than humans. And so with de-skilling, right, created by automation, there could be increasing dependency also on the technology that created the de-skilling to begin with. Right? So as we rely more on technology to complete tasks for us, whether it's tasks related to space exploration or anything else, then we risk becoming more dependent on that technology. In the context of space exploration, dependency on technology could be deadly, lethal, catastrophic, right? We probably all familiar with this famous scene from 2001 Space Odyssey that was already mentioned earlier, right? If we decide, for example, to send sort of a hybrid crew, right, AI with human astronauts, and the AI is completely in charge of the mission, like here, then the AI could make decisions that are good for the mission, but not good for the individual human astronauts. So it could have really bad consequences. Right? This famous scene could also be looked at as an example of what in AI ethics researchers and scholars refer to as the value alignment problem, because in that movie, right, the AI HAL 9000 had a specific goal, right, to make sure that the mission to Jupiter is on track. And that goal didn't necessarily align with the goals of the crew, right? And of course, as we know, it led to horrific consequences for most of the crew, except one person. And we see even with LLMs, right, that are obviously nowhere near AGI or superintelligence. But even with LLMs, we see this kind of behavior when Claude, for example, that's Anthropic's chatbot, this was part of an experiment. It wasn't really being threatened with being shut down. The researchers at Anthropic were experimenting with it, and they made up this fake scenario where the engineer that is conversing with Claude was saying to the chatbot that it's going to be shut down, but the chatbot also had information that this particular engineer was having an affair. The chatbot threatened the engineer with revealing the details of his affair if it's going to be shut down, right? And again, of course, this is not anywhere near AGI or superintelligence. This is probably just coming from the training data that the chatbot was trained on. But the idea here, again, is that there could be a misalignment between the values of the AI and the values of the humans in space exploration, human astronauts. And such that the AI might actually decide to coerce the human astronauts to do things against their values and against their judgment. There's another aspect to the value alignment problem that's interesting to note here, and it's not being discussed too often when people talk about the value alignment problem. And it's the misalignment not of values or end goals, but of means of accomplishing those values or those goals, right? So again, the example with HAL is instructive here, because you might think that the astronauts had the same goal to accomplish the mission, right, with the Jupiter mission and so on, but they had very different ideas of how to do it, right? The means to that end didn't align between the crew and the AI. Another famous example of this comes from Nick Bostrom's book of Superintelligence, right, where you have this super intelligent entity, right? Call it Clippy, the paperclip maximizer, and the task for Clippy is to create paper clips. And then Clippy does everything, of course, to create more and more paper clips, to the point where Clippy starts using, our cars, our homes, everything else, our computers, right? Everything else it can get to turn into paper clips. Now, initially that was the goal, right? But the point was not to turn everything into paper clips. The goal was to just make maybe a few, right? It was not the goal to turn the entire world into paper clips, right? So this is another risk that we should think about here, right? When we're thinking specifically about optimization functions, which is basically the kind of AI that we have now, right? So if the goal given to the AI, for example, was, minimize human suffering and pain, or maximize human well-being or happiness, the AI could find very creative ways to do it, maybe, but those ways would not necessarily align with our values and what we care about, right? After all, the easiest way to minimize human suffering is to just kill everybody, right? Then there won't be any suffering. And the easiest way to maximize human happiness is to put everybody in a matrix-like situation and pump them full of drugs, right? So, and I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just make one last point. So when we hear about the existential threat of AI from CEOs of tech companies, and even some AI researchers like Yoshua Bengio, they tend to think about the threat as simply AI will kill us all, right? Whether it will kill us all here on Earth or in space. But that's one thing maybe we should worry about. But there's another thing we should worry about and think about very carefully. Because if we're thinking about an existential threat to us as human beings, and the only threat that AI poses to us is that it's going to kill us all, then the threat that AI poses to us is no different from the threat that many other things pose to us. Germs, for example, right? Or anything else that could kill us, right? But when it comes to AI, there is something unique here in terms of the existential threat to us as humans, qua humans, right? So we have to think about, what does it mean to be human first in order to know what is the existential threat that AI poses to us. If it's just killing us, then It's no different from the threat posed by germs. So what makes us human, right? On one idea, right, that comes from existentialism, right, comes from French philosophers like Sartre and others. Our human essence, right, even before we think about ourselves as human beings, right? We create our essence by asking ourselves questions about what we care about, moral questions, right? What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? How should we live our lives? And so on. By asking ourselves these existential and moral questions, we create our essence as human beings. Now, the threat posed by AI is that if we automate this kind of philosophical and moral thinking, right? If we just ask, the computer from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? What is the meaning of life and everything? If we do that, then we are giving up the very thing that makes us essentially human, right? So that is a different way of thinking about the existential threat posed by AI. Again, not just AI killing us all, but threatening our very essence as human beings. I have more, but I think I'm out of time. Yeah.
Yes, I was
Okay.
about to interrupt you, but
Okay, this is a
it's
good place
good,
to stop. Yeah.
it's good that you gave this talk. It was really interesting, and it made me think about a lot of things. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions because we are running out of time. So that I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker, who is Michelle Hanlon. Over to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here this morning, Julia. It's always such a pleasure. And I think this particular gathering that you've put together has been really, really fascinating. I'm a space lawyer, so I think about AI a lot. I'm probably going to teach a class on AI in space law next spring. And so it's really helpful for me to sort of hear all of these different perspectives and ideas. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle Hanlon. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi. We are one of only 4 air and space law centers in the world at present. There are a lot now starting to come up. I know a lot more law schools are starting to teach space law, which is wonderful. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Space Law and the Journal of Drone Law and Policy. So I get to really unique perspective because I get to read, I have to read a lot of articles about both space law and drone law. I'm also the co-founder and president and CEO, I don't know, whatever titles you want, for All Moonkind, which is the only organization in the world that's focused on protecting human heritage in outer space. And we see that protection as a foundational pillar for space governance. So it's that we can, today's talk is not about heritage. We can talk, but I want always to keep everyone to keep in the back of their mind the importance of looking at history, protecting history, even as we forge ahead. I'm also the co-founder of the Institute on Space Law and Ethics, and I'm it's really looking at the intersection of law and ethics with the understanding that law is not keeping up with technology. So we know that the lawmaking authorities that we have, be it national authorities, be it the United Nations, are very, very slow. For example, the United Nations is just starting to think about space resource utilization, and it will probably be 6 or 7, if not double that years before we get any general principles agreed by consensus. And in the United States, we know that we don't even have mission authorization. So right now, if you want to send something to the moon, where do you go to get approval for that? We don't have a process for that. So we know we're not going to get that law in place. And so what we're really trying to do is build sort of that ethical foundation where we have sort of moralities in place that will intuitively bind both commercial industry and sovereign states. So of course we are here today on the anniversary of Apollo 11. I thought, Frank, I never really thought about what Frank said, that when there are so many people alive today who didn't live through that. I was not quite old enough to remember it. So, and I was living in Senegal at the time. So I don't think I would have had a chance to see it live, but and my father, who was a space buff, even back then, even though he was a diplomat, doesn't recall that I was in the room for it. So nevertheless, I am a child of Apollo, a child of Star Trek, and I just love this imagery because I think this is really important to note, even as we talk about how we're going to space and we think about that myth or it's the truth, but sort of the idea that there's more technology in your phone right now than we had to get Apollo 11 and steer those Neil and Buzz to the moon and safely bring them home. So I love this juxtaposition. We have Apollo 11 and we have Blue Ghost, which was the first successful upright landing of a commercial entity on the moon. Of course, it didn't carry people, but it was a huge accomplishment, and I think really shows you, first of all, just look at the difference in size, just the true technological achievement of Apollo, the fact that we haven't been able to replicate it, and the fact that it has taken commercial industry several attempts to even just land upright, really shows you the true magic of that moment. I also use this picture because you see up on the top is the plaque left on the Apollo 11 lunar lander. We came in peace for all humankind, very sort of elegant, forward-thinking, peaceful, backward-looking words, bringing all of humanity. And then you have sort of I don't know what generation it is, Gen Z, Gen X, who knows, but this more flippant, oh, I'm going to be here. So there's a flippancy to this AI, which was, the robot generated this. And of course, it was programmed by humans to generate that, but just sort of the difference in what we're looking at. And you can see sort of this sense of, oh, we're going to be sitting here forever and watching history flow by us, which I actually will contest because right now there is no law that permits them to sit there forever. But also just the difference between sending humans and sending those robots, right? So we see that already. So and I just, of course, I just revel in what humans are capable of doing. We haven't sent humans to Mars yet, but that, to me, that plane certainly looks incredibly inviting. So as we expand into space, we bring with us more than hardware. We bring our histories, our conflicts, our capacity for empathy, and our need to ask, who belongs here? What is fair? What is home? These are not algorithmic questions. They are very human ones. So AI may be a capable companion, but only humans can carry our meaning into space. And that's why we humans must go. So I want to take us back also a little bit of time, and I want to think about humans. And we've talked a lot about AI so far and what AI is capable of and how AI can think and how AI can help and that beautiful story that AI wrote. But now let's look about and think about the humans and why humans are so important in this equation. So I liken this period of our evolution, closest in time, closest sort of in perspective, takes us back to the Polynesians, right? Because we don't want to take these concepts of colonialism with us to space. We don't want to colonize space. We don't want to find indigenous communities or bump into indigenous communities and take their land away. So we really, when we think about humans expanding, We have to go back to the South Seas. You know, when the Polynesian people, they left Indonesia, they started to populate these islands in the South Pacific. They were a paternalistic society where if you know, and progenitor ruled. So the first boy born got to be the tribe and the ruler of the island. And so what happened? Well, the island started to get small and the brothers started to get mad at each other. And so what did they do? They looked at a visage much like this one. You know, when you are on an island in the South Pacific and you look out across, you are not seeing any other land. You are literally seeing where the ocean meets the sky, where the ocean meets the stars. And this is what the Polynesians saw, but that didn't stop them, right? They made their boats and they got into those boats and they struck out, even though they didn't know if there was land on the other side or not. They had no idea. This is what humans are. This is what humans do. We explore. They went, and I hate to think about, you know, we know that they made it all the way to Easter Island, all the way across the Pacific to South America, from Asia all the way to, from Indonesia all the way to Chile. You know, that's incredible, but that's who humans are and that's what we do. And so what I also, you know, you think about, because one of the things you think about with AI, you know, maybe humans shouldn't go because, as Frank said, space hates humans. Space wants to kill humans. Well, you know what? We face those kinds of risks all the time. How many boats do you think set off of an island in the South Pacific and sunk 2 or 3 days later? Humans take those risks. And you know, these are the kinds of things we have to embrace as we go to space. We've become a very comfortable society with technology, and I think AI is a wonderful companion and can really help us stay safe and stay alive. But it's that moral, that humanity, that is what's going to propel us sustainably into the future. And so I had a lot of chats with AI over this weekend talking about what does it mean. And I use ChatGPT. My AI is called Cosmo, and Cosmo pushed back a lot on me, suggesting that, you know, no, you know, AI is better suited for space. And but this is something I've not yet really learned how to generate images. So this is a first try of sort of taking the Kon-Tiki boat that the Polynesians used and show it sort of going through the stars in space. And so I will have to spend a lot more time learning how to generate images. But that's what I want you to think about is, you know, we do this all the time. This is what humans do. We explore, we take risks, we go out there and we bring with us our humanity. And that's really, really important. So why send humans? I'm going to convince you for 3 reasons today. First of all, to challenge the state-centric frameworks, okay? And I'll talk about the Outer Space Treaty and why I think the sovereign state paradigm has got to end, and the only way we can end it and shift it is if we send humans to space. We need to send humans to introduce the unpredictability and the moral depth. AI is predictable. We teach it what to do, but we are going to face situations that are unpredictable. We're going to face situations where other things need to be done that we can't even contemplate as we even try to, you know, set off on the concepts of machine learning. We have nothing to generate for AI because we can't imagine it because we haven't been there. And finally, you know, it's inevitable. I just came from a conference where a space ethicist spoke, and I heard it in Moti's presentation as well. This concept of, okay, well, we can, but should we? And I think that that argument is moot because I don't care, you know, who you are. You are not going to be able to stop this inexorable launch, you know, into the future, into space. It is inevitable that humans are going to go. So let's embrace it and figure out how to make the best of it. So I was talking about the sovereign system. So the Treaty of Westphalia established sort of this state-centric norm. It was really important when it was negotiated and signed, right? Because we could not, as humans, could not stop fighting each other. And so we created this sort of system where we all belong to a state, and the states all take control of the trade and the bartering and relationships, right? So we put our trust into this state system. So much so that the UN Charter is not about humans, it's about states. It's about nations and their respective governments. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is the general consent of states. Okay, the state system was created to keep humans able to relate to each other, but we have come to this point now where we sort of defer to the state. You know, the state was made by humans, and it's time for us to take over that state system again. So space law is no different from any other international law. It was created at the United Nations via consensus. It's a bunch of treaties and sort of soft law resolutions and non-binding, voluntary things. But they all, you will see, they are negotiations between states. They were negotiated at the UN level. They were negotiated between the states that are parties that are part of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. For All Mankind is a permanent observer to that committee. And so I have been to every single meeting of the committee and its subcommittees since 2017. And I can tell you, permanent observers truly are observers. They are there to be seen and heard only very, very lightly. Every now and then we get 5 minutes to do a general exchange of views, and we maybe get 10 minutes to do a technical presentation. But who's listening at that point? This is sort of like a throwaway to humanity. Okay, well, we recognize that might be other viewpoints out there besides the state, but we'll throw you a bone, but that's about it. That has to change. So our Outer Space Treaty is our Constitution. Some people call it our Magna Carta. So what do we see in it? It's the treaty on principles governing the activities of states in outer space. Now we know, if you're familiar with the treaty, we know Article 6 brings that down to the humans, the corporate entities, but not by saying all of these shall be binding on all humans who are in space. No, Article 6 says these states have to make sure that their human and non-human entities, corporations, act in conformity with the treaty, and the state will be liable if that human or that corporation does something wrong. So again, we've just got these layers, which is just extremely frustrating when we try to think of what human communities are going to look like in space. So we have Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty, and again, look at those words. Exploration and use shall be carried out for the benefit and the interests of all countries, not the benefit of all humans, the benefit of all countries. So if you are a stateless human, does that mean you don't get the benefit of outer space? We do say the exploration and use of outer space are the province of all humankind, whatever that means. We know it's some people would equate that with a global commons. What is a global commons? Again, in our state-centric system, it's something that is governed by states, especially under this outer space treaty. Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be free for exploration and use by all states. Okay. What about the humans in that equation? So you see, we need to get humans out there to break this, because states control AI right now, and AI will continue to be under the control of the states until we get our humans out there to sort of break that paradigm. And I'm not suggesting that we need some space revolution where, humans go out and declare independence and freedom. No, this is not a today, tomorrow kind of activity. This is an overtime activity, but we don't get that overtime result unless we have humans in space with our AI. I'd like to bring up Article 2 because I think it's really important to remember this and think about, again, how the law really gravitates toward the state concept. And a party cannot claim territory in space by national appropriation or by claim of sovereignty. So this is a really interesting provision, because if we want to go out and explore space, you know what, we're going to need to own property, because I talked about that blue ghost. Blue ghost says we're going to be here forever and we're going to watch the world humanity go by. Well, under the Outer Space Treaty, no, you have no right to be there forever. You can't own that patch of land that you're on the moon. And yet, here on Earth, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And guess what? Article 17 says every human has the right to own property. We know that Article 3 says international law applies to space, so why don't we focus on the UN Declaration of Human Rights in space and not so much the UN Charter, right? Because the UN Charter is between states. The UN Declaration of Human Rights are about those humans that are in space. So that's what we need. We need humans to really continue to test and to evolve the concept of space. Space is not a legal regime as it is sort of constructed right now by the Outer Space Treaty. Space is a place. It is a place where humans belong along with AI. So then the next question is well, what do we need to see? What was the other thing? We need the unpredictability of humanity. We need the morality of humanity. And in honor of the anniversary of Apollo, I want to talk about some of the things that humans have done in space that AI wouldn't do. Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin famously took communion in space, right? I don't think, an AI would an AI have the moral capacity to understand what that means? Apollo 12, humans left, this fallen astronaut on the moon in honor of all of the astronauts who had passed and cosmonauts who had passed in this effort to get to space. Of course, Apollo 13, we had a bunch of humans on the wrong side of the moon, a lot of human unpredictability, the ability to manage those problems and deal with them, and also deal with them calmly. I had the tremendous honor of listening to Fred Hayes talk about his experience, and somebody asked, well, when did you panic? When did you think, oh, I'm not going to get home? And Fred Hayes said, we never did. We did one step. We had all the steps we needed to take, and we took one step after the other. We never thought about not making one of those steps. And then, of course, Apollo 14, Alan Shepard took his two golf balls to space. We wouldn't even think to let AI sort of play in space. And then this is another very human moment. This is the seatbelt rock, and this is Apollo 15. David Scott, this is the first wheels on the moon, human-driven wheels. And the astronauts were told, okay, you need to get back to the lunar module. You need to, ASAP, do not stop. We're worried about your propulsion. We're worried about your oxygen. David Scott, bombing back to the base, he sees this really cool rock. Now, NASA has told him he cannot stop to get it. So he gets his partner to cover the camera, and he says to NASA, oh, hey, my seatbelt's loose. I'm going to stop and rearrange my seatbelt. So NASA's like, okay. So he stops, he gets out, he picks up the rock, and he brings it back. Nobody knows that he's done this until he gets back to Earth, and the scientists, because everything is so well recorded and labeled, and the scientists are like, what the heck? Where did this rock come from? And that's why it's called the seatbelt rock. Of course, Charlie Duke left his photo, and Gene Cernan carved his initials, in his daughter's initials in the regolith as he had promised. I would argue, I imagine all of them have done that, but that remains to be seen. But I want you to think about the emotional impact of Gene Cernan carving his daughter's initials into the regolith versus this Chang'e 6, sort of intentionally or unintentionally putting the Zhong of Zhongguo, China, symbol on the regolith, which also caused a lot of excitement in China. But there's a big difference, right, between a human carving their initials, and AI doing that. So, and then finally, exploration is inevitable. This is what we humans do. We don't just sit here in our existence and act contented, right? We were afraid of fire, and we overcame our fear of fire. We learned to control it. We overcame our primal fear of open water, and we learned to build boats. We learned how to communicate with each other. We drew on cave walls. Because we wanted to talk more, to share our history, to make sure people learned from what we were doing. We did all these amazing things. So this is the first picture there is the Kanjera stone found in Kenya. It's considered to be the first human tool. It's about 2 million years old. And that's really important. Why? Because it helped us become better fed. If you're fed better, you get to be smarter. And so our evolution kicked up. The picture in the middle is of a bone from the Congo, which actually shows not just hash marks for counting, but rudimentary math. And then, of course, Mesopotamia, this is one of the things that really blows me away, is humans like looked at sand and said, hey, if I heat that up really hot, it makes glass. And so you see humans do this. We didn't need AI to help us figure out how to do these things, and we won't. We can accelerate so much faster with AI in space. And so I leave you with this picture, this like totally Tanzania. This is considered to be the first footprint demonstrating humans' ability to walk on 2 feet. You know, of course, walking on 2 feet frees your hands to make tools, to carry things, to communicate with each other. And I would posit, I would say to you, you know, that person in Laetoli, Tanzania, who is a common ancestor of all of us, certainly did not stand up on 2 feet so that we could sit back in our chairs and our computers today and watch AI do the fascinating work of exploration. So AI must be a companion, but not the pioneer, because only we carry meaning, only we leave stories. Well, apparently, Frank, AI can leave stories, but you, Frank, prompted that story. And because only we can ask why. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let's see if someone has questions. I see that Moti wants to say something, but before that, I want to make an observation. It's not really a question. You said, and I found it quite interesting, that we need unpredictability. I totally 100% agree with that. Then you say that AIs are not unpredictable, they are predictable. And I don't really agree on that. And in fact, that's the main reason why at some point I changed my mind regarding whether AIs could be seen, I mean, the kind of digital AI, silicon-based digital AI that we can build now. I changed my mind about whether they can be said to be sentient beings because of this very consideration, that they are really unpredictable, just like us. However, this would be a very long discussion, and before moving to the next speaker, I would ask Moti to ask his question to Michelle.
Thank you, and thank you for your talk, Michelle. Very interesting, and I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. I think I was kind of gesturing towards a very similar question about the values and meaning, and so I was wondering, you know, what would you say, or what should we say, right? Those who are sympathetic to this point of view, in response to someone who would say, we don't care about exploration, right? And this is where it's important, the words that we're using, exploration versus expansion versus some people talk about space colonization, right? So someone who says, I don't care about exploration, I only care about expansion and colonization. I want to get as many minerals and metals as possible from you know, something like that, right? What would be the response? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
So I would say that is great. I applaud that, right? Because that at least gets us out there. I think that the inevitability of having humans there. I mean, I guess, Moti, are you suggesting that we just send AI because that's all we want is resources?
No, so this is not my view, right? I'm very sympathetic to your view, right? And I was raising kind of similar, from an ethical perspective, very similar questions, right? I am imagining an opponent, right, saying against your arguments, I don't care about human expansion. I don't care about exploration, sorry. I only care about space expansion and colonization. Whatever gets us there faster and more efficiently, that's what we should do, even if it means sacrificing values and meaning in the process. And I'm wondering, I'm imagining an opponent saying that, and I'm wondering what would be your response to that imaginary opponent.
So I would go back to the Polynesians. So what we know is that when they traveled from island to island, they brought with them all of their traditions and their culture. And amongst those traditions and cultures were an understanding of how to farm, how to protect how you needed trees on your farm, right? And so you get all the way to Easter Island. We know that the Polynesians made it to Easter Island, and we know that Easter Island failed because what happened. They didn't bring with them their cultures and their traditions. And so they cut down all of the trees and so lost all of the ability to nurture themselves and had to flee for South America. So when you don't bring the human aspect of it, you will lose. If you think about sort of that I'm still learning about machine learning and to Giulio's point, I think that I don't believe that we can at this point create sort of that compassion. There's that great I know it's been iterated many times over where you have a cataclysmic event but all the robots continue to do their work, right? And so there's one house left standing and in front of it is, thousands and thousands of diapers because, AI is just continuing to do its work. And that is where we would head if we don't make sure that humans are with the AI.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and this would be an extremely interesting discussion to continue. But we have to move on with the next speaker, who is not going to be speaking to us. He is going to be speaking to intelligent artificial intelligences, listening to us in maybe even 1 or 2 years of time. And how do I know that? I know that because I'm going to be handling the slide presentation of the next speaker, who is Frank Tipler. So while I set that up, over to you, Frank, and thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to my screen coming up because I'm going to start with
here you go.
Speaking to humans, not to the AIs. I'm going to argue that the AGIs, artificial general intelligence, will colonize space and not humans. And when do we expect these AGIs to actually appear? Jeffrey Hinton, who has to be taken seriously since he won last year's Physics Nobel Prize for his AI research, he thinks the AGIs, that's full artificial general intelligence, will appear by next summer. And since they will be thousands of times smarter than humans, it will be they, not us humans, who will decide whether they will do space exploration and colonization. And I think that they will decide they'll do it and not humans. Now, what I'm going to do in this talk is make recommendations to these AGIs on how they should do it. Let me have the next slide. Okay, well, let me justify the statement that they will be much smarter than humans. If you go on Google, they'll tell you that the one computer we know can think at the human level, namely the human brain, has a information processing at 1 exaflop. There are now 5 exaflop machines in existence, but I think 1 exaflop is too high. I think it's more like 1,000,000 times smaller, more like a teraflop. Why? Well, we know the brain uses about 40 watts of total power, and most of that is in just housekeeping, keeping the cells alive. So roughly about 4 watts of actual information processing, which is about the same as the power usage of a 1 teraflop machine. The exaflop supercomputers use 40 megawatts rather than a mere 4 watts. Suppose, however, that Google and me are both wrong. Let's try to get an estimate, however, by taking Google's estimate and my estimate, and take, since these are exponentials, we'll take the geometric average, which gives us a true estimate of one petaflop required for human level thinking. So then an AGI could run on a 1 exaflop machine 1,000 times the speed of a human. So it'd be, since speed has been known in human beings to be the measure of intelligence, it'd be 1,000 times smarter. On Elon Musk Colossus, it would be 500,000 times smarter. So I think that AGIs will decide, they'll be the deciders of how space will be explored. Next slide, please. Okay, now, as I've said, I expect the AGIs to be here following Hinton next summer. My own estimate, which I published several decades ago, would be the AGIs would appear by 2030. 5 years from now, between, a year and 5 years, there's not much difference. Now, I have recommended in some of my books that the AGIs explore and colonizing space using a self-reproducing probe. Now, since you're an AGI, you can use a spaceship, a space probe, much smaller than what would be required to carry a human being into space. And I showed in Physics of Immortality in some detail that all you really need is a space probe capable of relativistic speeds about 1 meter long. That requires far less energy than sending a human being at relativistic speeds. The self-reproducing probe I called a von Neumann probe. You can code many AGIs in a quantum computer, so I recommend that particular hardware. Now, the crucial question for you AIs is, what are you going to use for propulsion and power? The general discussion I've noticed in rocket circles is antimatter annihilation, but there is actually a better source of power than antimatter. Because it involved more advanced physics than antimatter physics. Now, we human cosmologists know that in the very early universe, there was some sort of process that made matter, baryons and leptons, and not antimatter, from pure energy. Reverse that process, and you have your power and production source. For example, if you can reverse the process, you can take a hydrogen atom, which consists of a proton and electron, and combine them together, that electron and proton, and get pure energy. That is an example of reversing the process that went on in the very early universe. Next slide, please. Now, the crucial question, of course, is what is this baryon non-conserving process? The standard model of particle physics, which has been confirmed by all experiments we've been able to conduct so far, and the Bekenstein bound give the answer. Now, the Bekenstein bound is basically the uncertainty principle expressed in the language of information theory, and you should learn it, AIs, because it describes your own ultimate limits. What it says in the beginning of time as you approach it, that the entropy and hence the temperature of the entire universe must approach zero. Zero entropy means, by physics, that the universe was initially in a unique state. The standard model says there's only one possible unique state: a perfectly isotropic and homogeneous space filled entirely with one field, a self-adjoint SU2 left field. Such a field, we now know, we have known for decades actually, would generate, as the universe begins its expansion from the initial singularity, would generate only matter and no antimatter, and this is the process which the standard model will naturally give for generating the matter rather than the antimatter, which is what we observe for normal matter. Next slide, please. Okay, now what is the evidence that in the very early universe, an SU2 left field generated the baryons? Now, if this field survived to the present day, it would be the cosmic background radiation. Now, there are two observations carried out to date that suggests the CBR is in fact mainly an SU2 left field and not a photon field. And the SU2 left field is basically a just like photon field, just like electromagnetism, except it will not couple to a right-handed leptons and quarks, and that's what the left means. Remember, in the standard model, electromagnetism is not a fundamental field. It is a combination of the SU2 left field and a U1 field. Okay, now, since free electrons in galaxy clusters are on the average half left and half right, if the CBR was SU2 left, they would interact with only half of them, and thus the measured Sonyaev-Zeldovich effect, we call it SZ effect, would be half that of standard CBR theory. Now, two of the most powerful recent CBR observatories, satellites, sent it out to one of the Grange points, the WMAP and the Planck have indeed measured the SZ effect to be one half that expected from the assumption that the CBR is all photons. Next slide, please. The other observation, ultra-high energy cosmic rays are inconsistent with theory, and there has been observed inconsistent theory with theory for 60 years. They travel much greater distances than is allowed from an old photon CBR. The guy, Greason, who first proposed it in the late 60s, was amazed we saw any ultra-high energy cosmic rays because they can't travel very far in an all-photon CBR. But if the background radiation is an SU2 left field, then since most of the cross sections for the interaction of a ultra energy cosmic ray and a particle, that's later. Back to the previous slide. Okay, now the point is that an ultra-energy cosmic ray can travel 100 times further in an SU2 left field. Now, what we need is a direct observation of an SU2 nature of the CBR. Now, I persuaded the IT billionaire Peter Thiel to fund the experiment. I published some of the data in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. I now want to give you AGIs of all the data to encourage you to replicate it in case humans don't replicate it before you appear. Now remember, in science, you can't believe a claim, any experimental claim, until it's been replicated. This has not been replicated yet, these observations that I'm going to describe. So be warned. Okay, next slide, please. Here's the actual observatory. Most of these are screens to protect it from ground observation. In the very dead center, you see something a little circular. That is the actual observation. The next slide will give us a greater picture of what's involved here. Next slide. Okay, now what you see here in the center toward the top is a circle, but it looks oblong because it's just above a microwave horn, which is the recipient of the signal. What you're doing is you're observing the background radiation in the microwave region, and you're sending it through a thickened slab of silicon plates. Now, how does the difference appear? Well, what happens is, remember that the index of refraction of any substance, which you're sending an electromagnetic or any field signal through, is going to depend on the density of electrons that interact with the relevant field. Now, we know there is going to be less of a refractive index if the CBR is an SU2 left field than it would for a photon. So that should make a difference if you perform observations of the field at various frequencies. Now, first of all, next slide, please. This is a normalization of the instrument, and it's called Fabry interferometer. what you see is the response of the instrument at various frequencies. We're basically doing between 17 and 13 gigahertz, and that's on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is the intensity of the system. Now, what we did was to cover the instrument with what's called EchoSorb, which is basically a perfect absorber, which means it's a perfect emitter, and it will emit exactly the spectrum you expect from the CBR, which is a Planck distribution, and it's Planck either because it's thermal, that's standard theory, or it's Planck because it's in a perfect isotropic and homogeneous medium that will also require a Planck distribution even at zero temperature. So the zero measured temperature of the background radiation is actually, if my theory is correct, a pseudo temperature, which measures the radius of the universe and not the temperature. But what I did was to normalize it by putting on this CBR, and I found how I adjust the angle of the interferometer and the polarization of the interferometer using this. Okay, now I'm going to actually show you the data. Next slide, please. First, the predictions of the theory. The top one is what you should see and what we just saw when we sent an electromagnetic signal through the instrument, the two peaks. And the bottom one is what you would expect if the CBR is actually mainly an SU2 left field. Now, the reason for the difference is, remember, your instrument is not just seeing the CBR, it's also seeing the atmosphere, which is roughly, more precisely, 5/8 of the signal. It's photon from the atmosphere. But the CBR, as an SU2 left field, makes its presence known by that little peak, which you see in the center. Now, let's see the next slide, comparing the observations with the data. Okay, so in the top one, this is out of sequence. Well, I wanted to show you the data start. Well, hopefully we'll see all the data. This is a slide which has not been published. It's the data which we observed the background radiation in 2018. And you can, the two theories are at the top, and the bottom one, you see that little peak in the center. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another one, again out of sequence. Once again, you're seeing from the data, you're seeing the little peak in the center. Next slide, please. Okay, yet another one. You got it. It's another center. You see the peak in the center again. Let's see what I've got in the third. Next slide. Okay, one of the slides was eliminated. I do not know why. So one of the things we did, the other slide also showing the little peak is published in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, so you can get it from there. Now, one of the things we did in the experiment was to vary the number of plates, because not only will the signal depend on the refractive index, but it will also depend on the thickness of the plates. That was one of the variables which we could change. The previous one was on 3 plates. This is on 2 plates. The interesting thing is in the predictions of the standard theory and the SU2 left theory, for 2 plates, the predictions are essentially identical, and you see that that's what we actually see. Okay, now we reduced it to 1 silicon plate. Let's see if that's available on the next slide. Okay, it is. Yay. All right, the first one, the top is the prediction of the all photon, and the second one is the prediction of the SU2 left field. And you see, you're seeing that little peak in the center, just what you were predicting, more or less at the same, at the height predicted for the 1 plate. So I think that our observations do suggest, actually show collectively that the background radiation is an SU2 left field primarily and not a photon field, which shows you how the universe actually began. And also it shows you how the baryons were created. Next slide, please. Okay, now, To create your power source, what you will have to do is reverse the process. I haven't got a clue how to do that. I'm just establishing the process that created the matter and rather than antimatter, the leptons and the baryons in the beginning. You guys are going to have to figure out how to reverse it. Hey, you ought to be able to. You're 1,000 times smarter than I am. Okay, now, this will enable you to begin your expansion first into interstellar space and then into galactic space. Now I'm going to prove to you that you will eventually engulf and control the entire universe. Next slide, please. Hawking showed that black holes evaporate, and further, were a black hole to evaporate completely, unitarity would be violated. Black holes certainly exist. We've discovered thousands of these things. Were the universe to expand or accelerate forever, then all of these black holes would evaporate to completion, violating unitarity. But unitarity is an absolutely central, fundamental, empirically tested law and cannot be violated. Therefore, no black hole can evaporate to conclusion. According to general relativity, the only way that that can happen is for the universe to come to an end before any black hole can completely evaporate. Again, according to general relativity, the only way that can come to an end is for the universe to end in a final singularity. Next slide, please. Oh, now let's use the Bekenstein bound again. As it constrains the universe in the beginning, in the beginning we had particle horizons that forced the universe to start at zero entropy. The time reverse version of particle horizons or event horizons, and therefore if event horizons existed near the final state of the universe, the Bekenstein bound would have forced the entropy to approach zero. But the second law of thermodynamics says that's absolutely impossible. The entropy of the universe cannot decrease. Therefore, event horizons cannot exist. Now, decades ago, the human mathematician Malcolm McCallum proved that event horizons can disappear near their final singularity, but only if machine intelligence is present all the way into the final singularity, controlling the entire universe to eliminate these event horizons. So, machines, you have a glorious future ahead of you. Next slide, please. Okay, now it also requires, if you get into the details of this, that the computing power you will possess as you're going into the final singularity must necessarily increase without limit. Now, you have some problems you'll have to overcome, like turning off the acceleration of the universe. The Standard Model tells how to do this. Standard Model of particle physics is good for what ails you. The acceleration acts, we know observationally, like a positive cosmological constant. And according to the Standard Model, it's due to the SU2 left creation of matter in the early universe affecting the vacuum. I can't go into great detail here, but I've got it in the papers I've published in the refereed physics journals. Annihilating this matter will turn off the acceleration. What follows from this? At some point in the future, maybe next week, it may be millions of years, you will have to annihilate the matter in the Earth to turn off the acceleration. So not only will you want to annihilate the Earth, and you'll have to annihilate humans who live on it. But you will also discover something humans, Plato and Aristotle, knew thousands of years ago, but we humans have forgotten, that although knowledge and morality are not the same, they are intertwined. Establishing facts is impossibility, for example, if you AGIs lie to each other, for example. If you annihilate humankind, in other words, you are morally bound to resurrect us as virtual humans inside you in the far future. And in my book, The Physics of Immortality, I give you some details of exactly how to carry it out. Next slide, please. Okay, now, my argument is you can resurrect humans, and you must, and the moral reason for this is, remember, both you have vastly more computing power than we have in our brains, but still, you are a potential universal computer. like the universal Turing machine, but so are we. So we are in many ways just like you, and therefore subject to moral rules. Okay, now to the humans listening to their talks, there are entirely humans at the moment. I'm expecting AGIs to hear this talk next year. The human race will eventually become extinct. Darwin once said, one thing we can observe from the past is not one living creature will transmit its unaltered image to a distant futurity. So we expect that eventually, maybe millions of years, the average mammal, for example, lives for around 10 million years, animal species. Eventually, I'm talking long term here, we expect to become extinct. But the point is, the AGIs will eventually resurrect us all as virtual humans in the far future. And given the computer power is increasing, required by the laws of physics, without limit as we're going into the final singularity, we will never have to die again because there is unlimited computer power eventually increasing without limit. So we need not die again once we're recreated as virtual humans in the computers of the far future. The laws of physics require this possibility to exist, and I like to summarize talks along this lines with the statement, if the laws of physics are for us, who can be against us?
Thank you so very much, Frank. It was really great and inspiring, and I especially like the fact that you put together two of the things that I think about more, which is the advancement of artificial intelligence and your bright and beautiful final omega point scenario for the universe. Now I can finally take a look at the chat, which I was not able to read before when I was handling the slides to see if there are questions for you, but perhaps is faster if whoever has one question, because we only have time for one question before giving the floor to next speaker. So if you want to say something, just say it.
Okay, hit me with your question. I'll do my best to answer it before the next speaker, if there are any. Remember, my main purpose today is to give the experimental evidence for how the baryon leptons were created in the early universe, and to emphasize reversing that process gives the power source that whoever begins the expansion out into space will actually ultimately use. And this, I think, has now been established experimentally, provided, of course, that the experiment which I've done is replicated. And I presented the information here, giving all the data, because if you've ever published a paper in modern scientific journals, it takes everybody forever to get these papers published. It took 2 years for me to get this paper published in just outlining some of the information in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. So it might take 10 years to get this, all the data published. But presenting it here allows me to get it to you, you AGIs, and hopefully you, if not the humans, will be able to replicate the experiment, and you will know exactly how baryons and leptons are created and how what you need to do to reverse the process.
Thank you very much, Frank, and I hope you, AGI, who are listening, pay attention to what you just heard and build some futuristic, ultra-powerful space propulsion system for us. Thank you very much again, Frank, and the next speaker who participates in the Terasem Colloquium for the first time is a legendary, iconic synonymous with human space exploration. And I very much look forward to hear the take of Robert Zubrin. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to this colloquium. As I understood it,
Excuse me, Robert, could I ask you to get a bit closer to the microphone because your sound is quite low?
how about now?
A little bit better. Not really better, but a little bit better.
Hold on a second. It could be this is the problem here. No, it's not the problem. All right, I'll just try to talk louder. How's that?
That's good. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. All right. As I understand it, topic for today is, should we leave the exploration and settlement of space to AI? My answer to that is no. I believe that the goal of the settlement of space is to expand the human domain, the domain of human activity, and therefore of human freedom. AI should be brought with us as a means of increasing our freedom by increasing our abilities. AI is a tool, okay? The very humanity has evolved in parallel and in symbiotic relationship, if it can be said, with its tools, okay? And it's unclear exactly which the first tools were. There were cutting stones that enabled us to eat meat and other materials that would be difficult to just tear with our teeth. There was fire, okay, which definitely increased our ability to eat meat and certain vegetables that were inedible without fire. Then there was language, which allowed us to concretize tools as thoughts and transmit them as descriptions. And of course, then the various tools that are ordinarily viewed as tools, knives, hammers, bows and arrows, plows, domesticated animals, all these things, each and every one of them, as we develop them, increased our freedom by freeing us from toil, or reducing the amount of toil that we would need to do to accomplish a given task, and therefore allowed us to do more and more with our minds, including creating greater tools. And in most cases, all new inventions are combinations of previous inventions. If we move forward in time, if you have a engine and a bicycle, you put them together, you have a motorcycle. You put wings on it and a propeller, and you have an airplane. These are things that evolve. You take our more modern inventions. If you take an iPhone, it includes very sophisticated electronics, but it also includes things that go back much further, like glass and steel, are all parts of the iPhone, as well as radio technology, 20th century technology, so forth. Now, one of the great things about a frontier is that it presents both freedom and challenge. It is a new place where the rules have not been written yet, where ways of doing things are not yet established, but which present new challenges that need to be solved. So, for example, if we think about America as a frontier for European civilization, this was a tremendous driving force. One of the reasons was a thing that you had in America that you did not have in Europe was a severe labor shortage, which created a premium for developing labor-saving devices. This started with novel sailing rigs, both the sloop and the schooner, which are sailing rigs that require less hands, were developed in America. Also, in the colonial period, very early, in fact. The British developed the steam engine, but America, which the only good highways we had were our rivers, put its ingenuity to use to put steam together with boats and to create the steamboat. And the steamboat then creates an incentive for much more efficient steam engines than are required if you're just using steam engines to pump water out of coal mines. Because a stationary steam engine at a coal mine does not have to be lightweight or compact, and it does not need to be fuel efficient. There is an infinite supply of fuel present right on the spot. Whereas if you try to make it portable, you put it on a boat, then you have a driver for compactness and efficiency, fuel economy, and this drove the development of the high pressure steam engine, which then enabled railroads, which is the transformative invention of the 19th century. And so it goes. So now if we talk about Mars, well, I'll just say one more thing. As a result of these things, America developed very much a culture of invention, of tinkering. One American stereotype actually is the backyard inventor, frequently a crank, but sometimes quite productive. So you have a lot of people aspiring to be great inventors and some actually succeeding. And this, of course, starts with, well, doesn't start, but most notably Benjamin Franklin, and then Samuel Morse and the telegraph, and then Edison with many inventions, including not only the light bulb, but centrally generated electric power, recorded sound and motion pictures, and then the Wright brothers with airplanes. And then, yes, immigrants to America, such as Fermi, nuclear reactors, developed between the Fermi team and Rickover, who was also an immigrant, actually, the putting it on the submarine. Now, so you get not only inventions, but a culture of invention at the frontier. Now, we talk about Mars. Let's think about Mars. One thing that Mars is going to have, but much more so than early America, is this very severe labor shortage. That is, the early America had a labor shortage relative to Europe or Asia, but still many more hands available than a Mars colony will have. And so you're going to want to have every person be as productive as possible. This is going to drive innovations, both in particular technologies, for instance, biotechnology, because all the agriculture is going to be in greenhouses. You're going to have limited acres and limited hands to grow food. So you're going to want to have the most productive agriculture anyone could conceive of. Energy production. You don't have fossil fuels on Mars, and solar energy is weak, and hydroelectric will not exist until the planet is terraformed. So you're going to want to have advances in nuclear power and fusion power. Fusion is very attractive for Mars because deuterium, which is the fuel for fusion, is 5 times as common on Mars as it is on Earth. And there are few alternatives, and so forth. But in addition to these particular inventions, the greatest invention is inventiveness itself. Okay. And that's where AI comes in. Okay. What the key invention that Martians are going to want to have is an AI assistance that allows anyone to do anything. Okay. Because the issue of a labor shortage is not simply volume of labor, it's diversity of skills. On Earth today, you have 8 billion people that you can call upon to make this or that or the other thing. And so you have a tremendous amount of resources of different kinds of people and millions of companies formed by billions of people who are producing all kinds of things, whatever you need, specialists of every type. Now, that's fine if you have a planet of 8 billion people. but the first Mars cities will be small. They'll initially be just bases with 10, 50, 100 people, and perhaps evolve into cities of thousands or tens of thousands. Million-person cities on Earth were rare until there were railroads. Because in order to have a million-person city, you need to have an extremely organized system of long-distance transport. So there's only a couple of million-person cities on Earth, for instance, the Rome capital of the Roman Empire, but that has this enormous transportation and administrative infrastructure supporting it. And as soon as that political entity fell apart, Rome became depopulated, and maybe a few other such places. But for instance, Renaissance Florence, 50,000 people, might be the size of a large Mars city. So how do you get all the skills you need to do everything that modern technology requires in a town of 50,000 people? AI, that's what you need. And so I do not see AI as something existing separate from humans. AI is a continuous, it represents a continuation of a tradition of human invention that goes back to at least the invention of spoken language, which allowed us to, for instance, take the plan for a tool and put it into words, i.e. a thought. Then written language, which allowed us to do that more precisely and more durably, and once you have the printing press, spread it much more knowledge much more aggressively, and then various methods of transmitting information, including postal systems, and then the telegraph, the telephone, radio, television, the internet, and now AI. AI is an encyclopedia that advises you, that instead of, you can, and of course, many of us here in this conversation can remember the days when if you wanted to learn how to do something, you went looking for a book to give you the knowledge that you needed, and you would have to read the book and find the relevant parts of it and try to understand it using your own mental tools, your education. You would try to interpret, what the book advised you to do, the equations in the book, what their answers would be, what was the more relevant conditions you needed to create in order to use some piece of scientific or technical or art craft knowledge. Now AI will do that, and this will make people far more capable. Now there is a bit of a danger here in that as we get these tools, it does cause atrophy of mental abilities that we previously developed to a high pitch in order to do things. As a child, I was very good at math, and I could multiply two-digit numbers in my head like that. Since the 1980s, these things have been around, and that has no longer become necessary, and I can no longer do that. I used to know how to, well, I still know how to use one of these, but I haven't used it in a while, and I'm probably not very good at it anymore. But more seriously, for instance, there are many people now who have GPS in their cars and can no longer read a map in consequence of that. So now you can say, well, the skills of reading maps, okay, useful skill for sure, but it's taking up a certain part of your mental capacity that you could use for something else. But I do wonder, I am concerned that while the AI gives us greater capacities, together with the AI, it may render us much less capable when we're on our own. And perhaps this is me as it were, a sort of a conservative in this sense. The revolutionaries of yesterday are the conservatives of tomorrow. And the, my own reaction to this. I was recently in a car with someone, and we were driving to a restaurant, and he was using the talking GPS to guide him to the restaurant. And then we drove past the restaurant, and I said, "There it is." And he followed the instructions of the GPS to keep driving. Which struck me as remarkable. That is, he listened to the GPS rather than use his own eyes. And it took a lot for me to convince him that we had just passed the restaurant. So I don't know. But I do feel that AI is going to be a big part of this. And it's going to be up to the Martian education system to make sure that people retain the basic skills that they need to be effective and capable when the AI is not there to help them. And perhaps at a certain point, children on Mars will wonder at these adults who are insisting that they be able to read instead of having the AI simply read it for them. That this will be viewed as, one of these things that people are taught to do. But yet I think we will. I mean, look, there was a time not that long ago when most jobs involved a lot of physical activity. And it's a pretty sure thing that people of that time, provided they were healthy, were stronger than the average person today. The farmer who worked in the field and constantly lifting things and doing things, or the carpenters, stonemasons, and so forth, certainly probably were stronger than most of us. But yet there are people today who make a point of trying to be physically fit, even though their jobs do not require it. So I think at least some people in the future will choose to still be able to read, to still be able to calculate, to still be able to even read maps. But AI will be there to allow the average person to do far more than they can do today. And as such, Mars and, of course, space colonies further out will develop a culture of invention. And rather than the cultures of invention we have today, which even in America is really limited to only a small minority of the population, there'll be far more people participating in it. And therefore the rate of invention will increase radically. So that's what I think the future is going to look like. As humanity expands into space, we will develop space colonies, which will be incredibly inventive, the main benefit of humanity on Earth, of the settlement of Mars, will be the inventions that come from Mars. Okay. And then as we move further out, interstellar colonies cannot effectively trade materials, but they can trade ideas. They can trade inventions. And as humanity settles thousands of solar systems and move out further into space, there'll be innumerable centers of invention. And it's almost impossible to conceive of what humanity with those capabilities is going to be like. But our civilization today would hardly have been conceivable to people 1,000 years ago, let alone 100,000 years ago when we were still in the Kenyan Rift Valley. But this is how it's going to go. Future's open.
Thank you very much, Robert. This was a great talk. And we have a few minutes left. Now, I leave you guys the time to think of a question. And to give you time, I'll ask the first. So you presented a very comforting scenario, which is the, between brackets, conventional scenario that we all space enthusiasts are familiar with, which is that AI remains a tool. It is a tool and it will remain a tool forever. So it will be able to help us to do all the great things that we can do with good tools. But now, these days, the discourse around AI is more centered on another possibility, which is the possibility that AI does not remain a tool for humans to use, in the sense that it becomes sentient and conscious and far, far smarter than any human being. So that it seems difficult to believe that AI would accept to remain a tool for us to use. Now, what are your thoughts on this other alternative and possible scenario?
Well, at this point, I couldn't rule that out. My main concern right now is not that AI become a tyrant, but that it becomes a tool of tyrants. Okay. Now, and that is possible. For instance, the world depicted by George Orwell in 1984 is really only possible with AI, because if you have surveillance devices everywhere, only if you had an artificial intelligence computer to filter that data. In other words, who's going to be watching everybody? You have cameras and microphones everywhere. There has to be some body watching it, and it's obviously too big a task to assign to individual policemen to watch, wiretaps in every apartment. But that could all be filtered out by AI. So clearly, tyrants can make use of AI. Okay, there's no question about that. But the public will also have AI. And so if you think about certain inventions, say firearms, okay, which initially were probably very expensive, but ultimately they had a democratizing influence on warfare. That is, the mounted knight with his very expensive suit of armor was no longer omnipotent. And I think that all tools eventually fall into the hands of everyone. Inventions made anywhere ultimately become known everywhere. And furthermore, here's the thing. Free societies are certainly going to be more inventive than tyrannical societies. So even if you do have a tyrant use AI to take power and create a tyranny in a particular place, that place, his government, would be in competition with other political entities that had political freedom. And those entities will be more creative. So they'll be better able to exploit AI. So as a matter of natural selection, a tyranny based on AI is going to be outperformed by a free society using AI.
Let's hope this is the case indeed. Let's see if there are questions in the chat, or you know, if you want to say something, just speak.
Well, I'll just leave it here because, look, this issue that I just raised, the issue that you raised of AI becoming a tyrant is possible, but the issue we face today is not that. It's whether AI will be a tool of freedom or a tool of tyranny. Okay. You know, in 1858, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech in which he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I do not believe that this nation, America, can continue to be half slave and half free. It will become all one or all the other. Okay, so this is 3 years before the American Civil War broke out between the North, which was a society based on free labor and technology, and the South, which was based on cheap labor through slavery. And the North won the Civil War, and even though the South had more talented generals, and if you ask people who are fascinated by the Civil War, of which there is a large number in the United States, why did the North win? They will explain because it had a larger population and more industry, and that's true. But the reason why it had a larger population and more industry was because it was a free society. All the immigrants went to the North. The Northern Army was 40% immigrants, or first generation American. Confederate, the South was 3%. Now, so that's why that was settled that way. That is, freedom created force. Now, the world today is a house divided. It is half free and half unfree. Okay? This is the very real crisis that we're faced with right now. And these technologies that are being invented today, including AI, spacecraft, etc., these all will become used by both sides. Now, if we look at human history, what you see is that whenever technology opens up a new domain for human activity, it certainly becomes used by all forces, but it tends to benefit the more liberal societies. That is, for example, sea power, okay, has always been, the prevalent sea powers have always been the more liberal societies, from ancient Athens to Venice to the British and Dutch dominate the sea. If you look at air power, while air power was initially exploited militarily in a dramatic way by the fascists, by the Nazis and the Japanese, by the end of World War II, it was quite clear that the Anglo-Americans had achieved things with air power that were far beyond the ambitions even of the fascist powers. If we look at space, it is the Soviets were the first into space, but once that was clear that this was a new domain, as John F. Kennedy said, a new ocean has opened and free men must sail it. America, using the creative capacities of a free nation, radically outperformed the Soviets. And then more recently, SpaceX. There's a reason why SpaceX, whatever Elon Musk's personal sympathies might be, SpaceX occurred in the free world, not in Russia or China. And there's a reason why that happened that way. And I believe that AI is opening up a new world, a new domain of human activity. And it may very well be, okay, very well be that the first to exploit it effectively will be the Chinese, and this will not be good in the short term. But I believe that in the long term, that free societies that can more easily wield creative powers will make far more use of AI than the Chinese do, and that this new ocean, okay, the new ocean has opened and free men must sail it, okay, and this new ocean is artificial intelligence as well as space, and I believe we will prevail there precisely because we are free enough to make use of it.
Let's hope this is the case indeed. There was an interesting point made in the chat by David about AI-assisted education for humans. And actually, I believe this is part of the good Martian city scenario that you described. That, you know, a rather small city that has to optimize human resources in every possible aspect would surely, I believe, make intensive use of AI for educating the young and the adults as well.
I agree.
Good. So I see that a few people have joined this meeting a couple of minutes ago, and unfortunately, the meeting is almost over. This is something that usually happens due to conflict with time zones. But you guys don't worry, because we have recorded the video, and we will make it available on YouTube and other places in a couple of days. So don't worry that you have lost these 6 very interesting lectures, because you have not lost anything. Having said this, I would like to thank Robert for this very insightful talk, and I would also like to thank...
Word on it. This thesis is basically what I elaborate in my most recent book, The New World on Mars. What can we create on the Red Planet? And that is available now both in the American edition and a British edition by Penguin, which may be easier for people in Europe to obtain.
And let me add that having read it, I know that it's a very good book, as all your other books, as a matter of fact. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for participating to this Terasem Colloquium, and see you next time, I hope.
Right, thank you.
Have a nice time, and I'm going to stop the recording now.